copy of a copy of a copy of a copy copy. Deja vu.
Deja Review. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Deja Review podcast, where we talk about the original versions of TV shows that were later rebooted. This is season 1, which we're calling In the Zone because we're discussing the Twilight Zone. I'm Michael.
And I'm Mark.
And today we're talking about season 1, episode 10, titled Judgment Night. And Judgment Night came out on December 4th, 1959. It is directed by John Bram, who, by the way, Mark, also directed, this is his second Twilight Zone episode. He directed Time Enough at Last. And,
we liked that one quite a bit.
Yes, and of course written by Rod Serling, starring Rod Serling, Nehemiah Persoff, and Deirdre Owens.
There is a fifth dimension.
Both shadow and substance of things and
suddenly up ahead.
Just crossed over. You're moving into what is another dimension.
Next stop, the Twilight Zone.
Okay, here's Rod Serling's opening voiceover narration for this, which is a little longer than his usual ones. Her name is the SS Queen of Glasgow. Her registry, British. Gross tonnage, 5,000. Age, indeterminate. At this moment, she's 1 day out of Liverpool, her destination, New York. Duly recorded on this ship's log is the sailing time, course to destination, weather conditions, temperature, longitude, and latitude. But what is never recorded in a log is the fear that washes over a deck like fog and ocean spray. Fear like the throbbing strokes of engine pistons, each like a heartbeat, parceling out every hour into breathless minutes of watching, waiting, and dreading. For the year is 1942, and this particular ship has lost its convoy. It travels alone, like an aged blind thing, groping through the unfriendly dark, stalked by unseen periscopes of steel killers. Yes, the Queen of Glasgow is a frightened ship, and she carries with her a premonition of death.
I'm glad you pointed out that that's a long narration. I think that both the opening and closing narrations, which we'll get to, had a lot of heavy lifting to do in this episode because from the IMDb description of the episode, it says it's 1942 and a man finds himself on a ship in the Atlantic, not knowing who he is nor how he got there. He does know the ship will soon be attacked by a German U-boat.
What's interesting about that synopsis is it has a whole bunch of spoilers in it, yet doesn't really tell you what happens in the episode. So our quick synopsis would be, with that voiceover, we see this ship sort of sailing through the foggy ocean, and we get introduced to our main character, Mr. Lancer, who's out on the deck just looking brooding and scared and bewildered, some combination of all those, which we'll talk about. And he interacts with some other people on the ship, the captain, some of the other passengers, and we find out it's during World War II. They've lost their convoy in the fog. They can't see anything. They're worried about U-boats. He seems to know a lot about U-boats and their strategies and such, but he has some sort of, the episode kind of takes its time revealing this, but some sort of amnesia where he knows some things about himself and not others, remembers other things and not others. So he knows his name. He knows he's from Frankfurt, Germany. And he kind of gets more distraught as it goes on. And then at some point he realizes that somehow he knows that at 1:15 in the morning they're going to be attacked by a U-boat. And he's kind of freaking out about that. 1:15 arrives. And suddenly he can't find anybody else on the ship. It's empty. The U-boat surfaces, starts firing at them. Then all the people are back and we see them all getting, the ship getting blown up, rooms on fire, everyone trying to escape and not doing so. And he pulls up some binoculars and looks over the railing at the U-boat and sees on its deck himself commanding it. And then the ship sinks. And in the final scene, which also has some heavy lifting to do in terms of explaining things, it shows Mr. Lancer as the captain of the U-boat, and he's talking with one of his officers who's complaining that they didn't give the ship any warning before they attacked it, and they're all going to be damned, and wouldn't it be horrible if they were damned to just live over and over the same fate of the people on that ship and have to die again and feel the fear of that every night? And then the final shot is the same as it's not the first shot of the episode, but the same as an early shot of the episode with him back on the deck of the Glasgow Lancer back there and is going to go through this all again.
Yeah, and not to skip around too much, but one of the points that I actually really liked that last scene with his sort of ensign or whatever that comes in and he's like, we didn't give them a chance. We didn't warn that there were women and children on that ship. It had the effect of kind of the earlier episodes I feel like, especially the one where the very first episode where the guy was completely alone and the military leader comes out and he's like, well, and he like explains, he kind of summarizes the whole episode like very obviously to the audience. I felt like this was a much better way of doing that while getting along across the same summary of, hey, here's what happened in case you missed it, while not like directly almost addressing the audience. It felt a lot more organic the way they did it in this episode.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. I thought the idea of how they wanted to do that is much better than in Where Is Everybody, where there really was just like the military officer who's like, now the exposition.
Exactly.
I thought they could have gotten this was an episode, and I'll put sort of cards out on the table at the start. I liked this episode. I enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty intriguing. Had a really strong sense of mood. I thought this was one of those places that happens from time to time in some of these episodes we've seen, where the audience got a little bit ahead of the show itself. And this guy like keeps explaining it after it's like, yes, we got it. He's damned. He's going to have to suffer the same night. And the guy just keeps explaining it for quite a while after that.
Wait, I'm sorry, Mark. You did think it was like that?
I thought it was like that. I thought I liked the way that they sort of integrated that in and had that scene between the two of them. I think they could have got away with maybe a third the amount of dialogue that the ensign said, because he just really hammered the same point several times over. And I'm like, we all got it. We know what's going on. And he just kept saying it.
Now, do you think...
So that would be my take on that.
Do you feel like you knew what was going on, 100% knew what was going on, or you think you were beat over the head before he gave that speech, or do you think there was too much to that speech?
I think there was too much to the speech. So I'll go, I always make my notes as we're going on of what I thought was going to happen in the episode. And one of the things I liked about this is that there is some suspense, particularly early on, about how things are going to go. About 7 minutes in, which is where we first get Lancer kind of revealing he doesn't want to say where home is and doesn't remember some things about himself. And it's kind of suspicious. I actually thought it felt a lot like a sort of spy thriller, like he's secretly German, observing them, or maybe he's defecting. And there's like, but that wouldn't be very Twilight Zone. Like that could work as just a spy thriller movie. There's got to be something deeper going on here. But then when we hit just like a couple minutes later, so after we got a little bit more from him, he has a lot of exposition in this scene with Ms. Stanley, who's the aide to colonel or a general. She's also in military uniform there, so part of the military chain of command there, one of the passengers, and they have this sort of encounter out on the deck, and he gives some pretty expository stuff about, I think I can't, I can remember some things, but not everything. And maybe this is like I don't remember exactly what his line. Oh, he says, I feel like we're in a nightmare. We're being stalked, something like that. And I wrote my note there, and this is about 8 minutes. I said, maybe he was a U-boat commander of the ship that blew them up, and this is his version of hell. So I thought it was pretty clear at that point where it was headed. I wasn't 100% sure of that, but that seemed like probably where it was headed. So once they sort of confirmed that in the end scene, it was like, yes, this is where I was thinking. I didn't need another 3 minutes of them laboring over it.
Okay.
Did that answer whatever your question was?
Yes. So I'm glad. Well, you caught on probably earlier than I had the first time I watched it. Because I definitely was like, what the hell is going on? And then, and I think even right up to the end, because I mean, he could conceivably know. I think my thought the first time I watched it, right up sort of till the end, was like, oh man, he is he does have amnesia. He was a German soldier, U-boat commander or whatever. So he does know this attack. He does have German intelligence. He knows this attack is coming, and he either has amnesia, or maybe he was trying to defect, or he was trying to do something, and he can't remember why he's trying out there to warn them. I agree with you. I think it was more of a spy sort of thing, and I wasn't really specifically looking for Twilight Zone themes when I was watching this the first time. So, but yeah, I thought it did kind of a relatively neat job of, and again, as I always point out, like watching this in 2020 is way different than watching it in 1959, where we've probably seen those themes over and over again in, popular culture and media, that they didn't have as much, at least in 1959. So I thought it was a pretty good job.
Yeah. And that's fair. And I should also say, like, had I been just sitting watching this like as entertainment, I'm not sure I would have gotten that. Like, part of as I'm watching this for this podcast, one of the things I'm intentionally doing that we had talked about is like trying to make guesses on where it's going. So at a couple of points during the episode, I'm actually stopping it and like writing in a guess, which is making me take more time to think about it than if you're just sort of in the flow of it. So
sure.
It's not that I think that was like super obvious where it was going, but I thought it like logically. My point was it seemed clear enough to me that was a likely place it was going early on, that even if I hadn't stopped and thought about it, at the end, the first time the guy just said, that could be our version of damnation, and you're just living that night over and over. That would have been enough. Been like, oh yeah, it all clicks, great. And they really sort of belabored it there at the end. And I thought this was an episode that would actually be, to me, kind of the biggest weakness of what I thought was a strong episode, in that there were a few places where I feel like we got a little bit ahead. And the Twilight Zone episodes, in terms of the plotting, that I've liked the best are the ones where we kind of don't know what's coming, or like as we figure something out, the show figures it out, but it's moving on to somewhere else as well. There's another example of this. It's right before the first, I guess kind of the only major commercial break, right in the middle of the episode, where the steward finds this, is like putting away his clothes in his cabin, and finds this German, or this hat with a German rank on it. And the steward apparently is pretty knowledgeable about German ranks and insignias. He's like, oh, this is a U-boat commander hat. Is this like a war souvenir? And, Lancer takes it, and we're like, well, obviously it's his. And he like turns it over and sees his name in it. And there's this big like musical bum, 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 bum. And it like pushes in on him. And we're like, clearly the episode's supposed to be like, what? It's his? I'm like, it was clearly going to be his. Like, that was not a big surprise.
But again, I feel like
these are
60 years of seeing TV and movie tropes have made it that obvious that it was him. We can't obviously watch this in 1959,
but I will say a lot of their episodes, I think, even watching them 60 years later, we don't know what's happening, and they do a really good job of how they sort of parcel out the information. And a lot of the mood stuff and background stuff in this, I thought they did a really nice job of that. It was like those sort of couple of key plot points where they, I think they could have, I think the mood and tone of this was so strong, they could have relied on that a little more rather than trying so hard to like, and here's the surprise, and let's make sure you followed everything in the plot.
Yeah, fair point.
So
I wanted to call
I feel
back.
like I'm being super negative about an episode
No.
I liked quite a bit.
You're not on trial. It's okay. You can hate it if you want to. No.
That's a different podcast where I go on trial.
One of the things that you had alluded to last episode that I very much noticed in this episode, this has got to be the most expensive production we've seen so far. So I wonder if you were right about them getting an influx of cash, because this is one of the biggest casts we've seen. There's a battleship, well, not a battleship, but like a cruise ship, a U-boat set. There's a bunch of, it's done in water, which I know from Jaws, making ofs is always expensive. And then at the end, when they actually sink the boat, some relatively impressive action. This is definitely the most action-packed, I would also say, Twilight Zone that we've seen so far.
Yeah, right there with you. And we, as you said, we talked about it in the last episode, and we don't really know if they got an influx of money or their budgets changed or what happened. We probably should do some work and look that up.
No.
But we're not going to. But But yeah, I mean, this felt bigger budget than what we had seen. It was interesting you mentioned this is the same director as Time Enough at Last, because I again thought this was a really well directed episode and a lot of good production design and makes you feel like you're there on a boat. This didn't feel like a TV set. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit. I mean, if you're watching carefully, like, yes, it's a set, you can tell. But like for 1950s television, being on a boat and then having the U-boat across from them firing at them, and there's some explosions and fire and stuff going on their set. I thought it was pretty impressive. I laughed a little bit towards the very end when after they sink the ship, then there's a couple of scenes inside the U-boat right before the sort of ensign or whoever he is comes in and talks to the captain about we should have warned him. And there were some things there that were I would say very clearly, maybe I'm wrong, but seemed very clearly to be stock footage not shot for this episode.
For sure. Very grainy.
Yeah, which I think the funny thing was I think they could have gone without him, like just show the U-boat going back under the water and cut it, because in what was such a well-produced episode, and then they cut to the stock footage that is not as good as the footage they're getting for the episode itself. It like dragged it down a little bit. But really, yeah, really big and nicely well done.
There was also, I think, if I'm not mistaken, at one point he opens a door. I can't remember if it was on
Yep.
the U-boat or on the cruise ship.
It's on the main ship when he's going around looking for where everyone is.
And isn't there like a matte painting that shows the hallway beyond it, or was I mistaken on that?
No, I'm glad you caught that. And remember we talked about the matte paintings in Time Enough at Last.
Right.
It's the same sort of thing where it's like a perfectly reasonable technique to use to like extend the background out,
Right.
except he's like right up against the matte painting.
You can like see his
push in on
shadow
him, and you can tell it's a painting.
Yeah. Okay. I was like, is that definitely a painting?
This director likes his matte paintings right up with the actors. Apparently, that's his directorial signature.
So, Mark, I'm gonna also kind of my one negative about this, because I think we both agreed before we even started that we both like this episode. But one of the other things that I will say was kind of a negative, I could have used a little bit more explanation. So they said that the ship was lost as part of a convoy, and it was a supply ship. Why were these passengers on it? Because like at one point the captain is like, well, this ship is not designed to carry passengers, but they're in a dining room with a full bar. And I was like, what the hell is this?
And there's like a little kid with them too.
Yeah.
Like it's not just like, okay, we had to get some military personnel on here. Like it seems to be like a
cruise ship.
A cruise ship.
Yeah. I legit thought it was a cruise ship, and obviously it's a target, and they got lost as part of a convoy. So they were carrying military supplies. And one of the things that Carl Blanchard says at the end of the episode when he's back in his role as the U-boat captain is that, it was like 6 tons or whatever, like they sunk a supply ship. So I could have used a little bit of explanation as to why these people were on this ship, but other than plot point that this guy had to be doomed to hell for, hitting a military target with civilians in it, though.
Yeah, I would call this kind of, if we could use a sports metaphor for a second, like an unforced error. Like it was completely unnecessary for them to establish that this ship didn't normally have passengers on it, and then have passengers on it and have the full bar and I think they could have stripped out some of that stuff and just like, it's a ship, it's the middle of the war, ships crossing, some of them are going to get hit, and they could say there, there's military personnel, or it also had some supplies on it. So I would agree with you on that. It was a little weird and kind of didn't quite make sense, and they didn't need it.
Yeah. And
I think the only reason they had the kid on there was that they could have that imagery at the very end, which was super awesome doll. And dark, of like we saw the kid's doll early on, and then we see the doll like floating in the water after the ship had sunk.
Yeah. Well, I had just gone on a cruise last summer as well, and our ship was slightly nicer than this one. But part of this,
there's like a water slide on this and everything.
Part of this,
like we didn't see you at the theater production an hour ago.
a little part of me, I don't know if you've ever seen that that size comparison thing where they show like what the Titanic would have looked like in front of like a modern day cruise ship, and it's like, maybe 100th the size of it. It's like it looks like a toy boat in front of not a toy boat, but it looks tiny compared to. It can't be 100 times. Let's say 20
I'm sure
times.
it's not 100 times.
Yeah, whatever. So it looks tiny compared to what an actual cruise ship looks like in this day and age. So, that was my only kind of beef with it. I agree with you. Did we need that other than the sympathy thing? And like, I don't know, that seemed a little bit silly to me.
Yeah, and I guess to finish getting out all of our negatives, there's something else that was related to that just sort of general plot setup that again I thought was an unforced error. There's the conversation, two things related to sort of just the boats and where they are. One is that they talk about losing the convoy, but then it was sort of just unclear to me. They're like, well, in this fog, they could be 3 feet away and we wouldn't be able to see him. I'm like, so is it just because it's foggy you can't see him, or did you get separated from them? And again, I thought they could have just gone with any explanation, like the boat was by itself for some reason, or it was part of the convoy and lost them, or it was foggy, and instead they sort of like put all of those bits in there that can't all be true together, but they sort of threw them all in. And then related to that, there's this, I thought, really interesting conversation in terms of naval strategy, where they were worried about the wolf packs, these groups of U-boats, and Lancer, who knows German strategy as U-boats, which is a revealing detail about him, is like, well, actually, if we're by ourselves and lost at convoy, we don't have to worry about the wolf packs because they're not going to go after a single ship. They're going to look for a convoy. We need to worry about, the lone ship coming after us, which I thought was interesting. But then I was like, so is it safer to go by yourself than in a convoy? Yeah. Because then why are they going in and again, I thought that was interesting to learn. I'm assuming it's true. I don't know for sure. But it kind of like sidetracked us from the main thing where they could have just been afraid of, like, there's been U-boats sighted in this water. I guess that one I can a little bit excuse, because part of the point of that was to give Lancer a chance, or to give a plot opening for Lancer to reveal some information about how U-boat captains think that a normal person wouldn't know.
Yeah, and piggybacking on that idea, Lancer did not, considering he didn't know exactly what was going on, did not do a great job keeping a low profile on this boat, because he was very much like, he was very, very German officer on this boat. And I was sitting there thinking, maybe, I think I'd probably keep my head down a little bit if I didn't know exactly what was going on. And I was clearly German and clearly like an officer on this boat.
Well, it seemed a little bit like a similar situation to some of the other Twilight Zone episodes we've seen, where sort of characters just sort of weird things happen and they just sort of accept it. So the devil shows up in your room, or the guy's teleporting around or whatever, and they're like, okay, that's fine. This was not Lancer, but the supporting cast was kind of like that. Like, he says he's from Germany, clearly knows all this U-boat strategy, and one of the other supporting characters, I think it's Mr. Potter, has like one moment where he's like, wait, you're from Germany? And then like 2 lines later is like, well, why don't you stay up? We're going to start a poker game. Like, completely forgets that he was suspicious at all, or if there's anything weird about that.
Yeah, and that goes back to, we should mention on multiple episodes, like, this is not a 90-minute feature film. This is a 22, 24-minute Twilight Zone episode. So
right.
They probably had a lot of ideas that they would have loved to explore that they just didn't have the time to do.
Although I thought they did a nice job with the captain of the Glasgow itself, because he sort of calls Lancer in, is like, oh, I noticed you know a lot about U-boats, trying to feel him out, and Lancer's kind of honestly saying, I don't really remember anything. I know my name and where I'm from, and I don't know, nothing else is ringing a bell. And he's like, well, okay, we should take a look at your passport. There was some issue with the records. Like, he plays it very cool and kind of then sends him on his way. But then it's like, we need to keep an eye on him. Send somebody to his room and so I thought that was a nice little touch, that like somebody was picking up on the fact that he's clearly a German officer.
Yeah.
There was a moment when Lancer spills his coffee on himself, and somebody comes to wipe him up, and he like stands up like ramrod straight, and like with a German accent, he's like, no, I do not need help, or
he's
something.
Like, 9.
Right. It's like, nobody's noticing this.
That was kind of my hey, maybe keep your head down a little bit.
Yeah, I just had a note, everyone should be a lot more suspicious of him than they are.
Yeah. So one thing.
So let's talk about good stuff.
Yeah, and one thing that is good that I wanted to piggyback too, you talking about kind of learning the German naval strategy or whatever. I thought it was kind of neat. So very early on in the episode, when he leaves the bridge and goes, or the deck, and goes into the dining room, the light goes off when he opens the door, and everyone kind of turns and looks at him, and then goes back on when he closes it. So I Googled around, and my understanding, and then later on, excuse me, in the episode, they do say, "Hey, lights are on in the salon. Let's go lights out down there." My understanding is that that was intentional, and that those lights would automatically go off when the door would open, so they would keep a low profile on the sea at night. So you wouldn't obviously have a light blinking on and off whenever anyone opened the door. That would make you a very obvious target in the middle of the ocean at night. I thought that was kind of neat.
I thought that was super cool and really well executed and visually interesting, like kind of seeing these lights go out and everyone goes into darkness and then the door closes and the lights come back on. It was a cool little bit of history and visually appealing in terms of it being a TV episode. I agree.
Before we go really lean into how much we like this episode, should we take a quick break and come back and drool about how good it is?
Fair enough.
All right. We'll be right back. Okay, we are back. One of the things that I thought was very cool about this episode, Mark, and hopefully you notice the same thing. There's a couple scenes where they're actually on the bridge of the ship, whatever it's called, where they have the guy actually steering the boat. And the wheelman on the bridge has this fantastic look to him. He's basically like zoned out, kind of like staring down and he's lit with like a light shining in his face. And he reminds me of Karen, the ferryman of Hades. Like, he barely moves, he barely reacts to anything. And he's just sort of, it's almost like he's a zombie driving the ship. And I thought that was a super cool image. I thought it was super cool imagery for the fact that this is hell that he's on. I don't know if you noticed that.
No, I love that you mentioned that, because I literally made a note on exactly the same thing about the guy steering it. And there's this great, like, it's kind of like a spotlight on his face, but coming from a little low and underlighting him, which gives you this little bit of scary look. And the same sort of thing, like he's just a zombie. I didn't make the connection to the ferryman in Hades, though, but I think that's super smart and totally fits. And yeah, he's just sitting there, sort of like turns the wheel, a 16th of a turn one way, turns it a 16th of a turn, and just sort of does that back and forth like he's a robot or something. It was great.
Yeah, and he wasn't looking out at where he was going. It was like and the way he's lit is very much like he opened Marcellus Wallace's briefcase kind of lighting. And it wasn't like, it kind of made me think that, like, okay, yeah, if we're on this ship in hell, it doesn't matter that this guy is not looking and he's not steering. Like, this is all just props essentially for this guy to live out this hell over and over again. Or maybe that guy was also in hell and he had done something horrible and his punishment was just to be this wheelman. But I thought it was such a clever, neat little, relatively subtle thing that they did that kind of blew me away, and I did not notice the first time I watched this.
No, I think that was a great detail, and again, props to the director of this episode and Time Enough at Last, who I think really, working on a TV budget and scale, has a really good sense of little details to put into the episode that you may or may not catch on the first viewing, but there's a lot of stuff in there.
Yeah.
So I guess while we're on that. I just wanted to mention a couple other things I thought were just really cool with the production itself. I love all the fog everywhere was great. Like, gave this great sense of atmosphere and gloom. And I guess we can talk about it when we talk about the sweatiness levels. But like the fact that everybody had like not sweat but like condensation on them whenever they were outside, like you really got the sense like this is a super thick fog, and shooting through fog you can do such cool things with lighting and the look, and this episode was really contrasty, like hard shadows, kind of on people, but then like lights coming through the fog and a lot of areas sort of falling off into shadow entirely. I just thought it looked gorgeous, and fit the sort of tone of what they were going for, particularly when they're outside. And then this other thing when he's out on the deck, is they always had, the camera kind of rocking side to side, or, perhaps they had a set that rotated a little bit. I don't know which end they did it on. But just those kind of like little details that made it feel bigger than just like we're at a studio in a set, like, put the camera there and these guys will stand here like they're on a bridge, and like gives you this sense of the boat kind of moving a little bit. And actually the amount that it's kind of swaying, I wouldn't think a big ship like this would actually be sort of rocking that much side to side all the time. But I thought it was a cool little detail with that.
Yeah.
And yeah, just some more great production. I want to mention, just before we go into the modern stuff, a little bit about the lead actor, Nehemiah Persoff, who I loved his performance. I thought it was great. And he actually gives two very different performances when he's Lancer sort of with amnesia, and then Lancer, the sort of stoic, confident U-boat captain. You really sort of saw a change in how he carried himself and how he said his lines and what he did with his eyes and everything. Like, a really good job playing the same character with two very different perspectives. And it's I looked him up because he looks like one of those guys. I'm like, I feel like I've seen him somewhere, but I can't place it. And he has a really long list of credits on IMDb, both movies and television. A lot of TV episodes as like a guest. So he's never like the star on anything, at least that I saw, but like guest roles in like every TV show for like 30 years. Usually he's playing like a foreign-born person, and often a doctor or scientist based on the names. In his IMDb bio, it said he became known for playing ethnic villainy, which I thought was great. But he's probably one of those character actors who's kind of been in everything. You've probably seen him somewhere. I had probably seen him somewhere, but like doesn't stick in your head. He's never the star, but made a long and successful career out of it. The one that jumped out to me, and there's no way this is what I would have recognized him from, because I haven't seen the movie in forever, and you don't actually see him because he was a voice, but he's the voice of Papa Mousekewitz in An American Tale, which was the cartoon I remember growing up with the family that migrates to the U.S. Yeah. And was the great Somewhere Out There. The song from that was very, very good.
Yeah, I think all the performances were really good. And you talking about sort of his duality, I kind of liken it to, he played the sheep and in the first 20 minutes of the episode, and then the wolf in the last 3 or 4. And the difference between his bravado in the last couple minutes versus you almost feel sympathy for this guy, because he does try to help the people that are on the boat until you find out, who he is and what he's done. For sure, he played both those characters. I mean, the same character, but at different points. I thought extremely well, and I thought it was really well acted.
Yeah,
across the board.
And this might bring us to larger themes that maybe should be in the next section. But since you mentioned him like trying to save everybody, it's this really interesting question of, he is the same person, and it's something like when you're put into these different roles, how you behave differently. Like, the person who would run around the ship trying to save everybody you wouldn't think of as the same person who, doesn't care about giving them any warning, and who cares if there's children and women on the ship, we're going to go ahead and blow it up because that's what we do as a U-boat commander. And I thought, again, we can talk more about that in the modern applicability, but I believed that this actor could play both of those versions of that character, and that they were the same person in different parts of their life. Yeah.
Should we wrap up kind of our discussion and get into our sweat?
Can I make last comment on the actor himself?
Of course you can.
The very first time we see him like sort of stumbling into the dining room. So we've seen a close up of him before, and then we're in the dining room kind of at a table with people, and he comes in the background. The way he sort of stumbled in felt very like Peter Lorre in M to me. And I don't know why. And I knew he didn't look like Peter Lorre, but somehow he was channeling the acting there. And then the other sort of...
So I know what you're talking about, but for those of our listeners who don't know what the hell you're talking about, can you explain who Peter Lorre in M is, or what Peter Lorre in M is?
M is a classic film. I don't remember what year it is. And Peter Lorre is this sort of, I don't know, like basically child serial killer. And just the way he moved. Peter Lorre's in a bunch of things.
Okay.
I don't know, something about just his movements in there, like it really reminded me of that, the way he was sort of like partially hunched and like tottering from leg to leg. I don't know. It was like one of those really strong impressions. I don't know where it came from.
Huh.
The other sort of movie reference I want to make that's not having anything to do with these movies, but I was like, is there a rule that in the olden days, like all ship captains had to have like full beards and mustache? Because I was like, the captain of the Glasgow, his facial hair looked like the captain of Titanic in Titanic. It looked like Captain Nemo, played by James Mason in the Disney 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And I was like, everywhere that either it's set in, the 40s, 50s, 60s, or made in the 40s, 50s, 60s, if you're going to be a boat captain, you better have a full beard and mustache, and that's just part of the look. It's a requirement.
Well, it's like being a cop and having to have a mustache.
Right? You do.
Yeah.
Right? I assume that's like somewhere in the application.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Okay, so
let's roll on.
Our closing narration was as follows. The SS Queen of Glasgow, heading for New York, and the time is 1942. For one man, it is always 1942, and this man will ride the ghost of that ship every night for eternity. This is what is meant by paying the fiddler. This is the comeuppance awaiting every man when the ledger of his life is opened and examined, the tally made, and then the reward or the penalty paid. And in the case of Karl Lancer, former Capitan Lieutenant, Navy of the Third Reich, this is the penalty. This is the justice meted out. This is Judgment Night in the Twilight Zone. That like literally gave me chills to read. Like that's how good Serling's narrations are. I thought that might be my favorite one that he's written. I just thought that one was as haunting and cool as could be.
Yeah, I thought the opening and ending of this one were really solid. Since we always fawn over Serling, I'll give super minor critique here. Is as you watch more of these, the ending narration always, ends with it's blah 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 in the Twilight Zone, right? And so I get to the point now where I'm sort of like waiting for that, and there were like several sentences in that end voiceover that could have, if you just put in the Twilight Zone at the end of it, would have worked. And then it's like, but I have another way to say that and another way to say it. And like,
yeah, let's see if this one sticks.
So I was just saying,
Navy of the Third Reich in the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, or this is the penalty in the Twilight Zone, or this is justice meted out in the Twilight Zone. But we, and you just sort of like kept rolling on. I'm like, we know it's coming, just say it. But yeah, the way these are written is great, and this is what is meant by paying the fiddler.
Yeah, I love that
line.
line.
Comeuppance awaiting every man when the ledger is so good.
Yeah, the tally made, the reward of the penalty paid. It was great. Okay, should we get to our sweat level?
Let's talk sweat level, which is kind of it's an interesting one because it's kind of hard to judge because everybody's wet all the time with the sort of fog.
Yeah.
But that's not exactly sweat.
No, I thought just my gut instinct was that this was very low again. I think when he's running around trying to get everyone to get off the boat is when I noticed that he was actually sweaty looking, and I think that was appropriate.
Yeah, and kind of just before that, when he's waiting in the bar he knows the U-boat's going to attack at 1:15, and he kind of just sits there for an hour. And he's super nervous and stressed out. He gets really sweaty when the engines go down. And I kind of made a note because he's there talking with the bartender and one of the ship officers. And they seem like super calm, even though, the captain had just sort of said we're kind of screwed. If we speed up, we're going to burn out the engines. If we slow down, the U-boats are going to catch us. Like, he understood the danger. And then his second lieutenant or whatever is in there, the engine stops. He's like, yeah, whatever, they'll fix them. It'll be fine. And Lancer is super stressed out and pretty darn sweaty at that point.
Okay. So what do you think?
Maybe a 3 because he gets pretty sweaty at some point, but it was...
Let's give it a 3.
Useful. Now, if this was a wetness scale instead of sweatiness scale, then we'd have to go higher because he was covered in fog all the time.
Nope, we're not going to get into that. 3 out of 10.
What about when the people fall in the ocean? Then
stop. Really... Modern applicability. And Mark, we kind of discussed at the break. I think our modern applicability section is kind of turning into, hey... what does this remind me of in recent film and television? And so I think we're going to probably be including some of that discussion.
I wouldn't say turning into. I think we're definitely including that, but also talking about some of the sort of current themes and such too. So,
So the first thing that this reminded me of, did you ever see, it came out in 1981, it was a Wolfgang Petersen film. It was called Das Boot, and
Yes.
it was, okay, so
I have
it's
that
about
on DVD in my office here right now.
it's a fantastic, fantastic movie. It's about a World War II German U-boat. It's very claustrophobic, very scary, very, it had a lot of the creep, because I think this was one of the creepier episodes. We've been seeing some creepier stuff happen in Twilight Zone, and Das Boot definitely has a very creepy, frightening, like anticipatory feel to it, like this episode did.
Yeah, and I think there's also obviously Crimson Tide, another one set on a submarine. That's not creepy in the same way, but super intense, and like you're waiting, like you know something's going to happen. U-571, about the same time as that. Not as good as either of those other two you mentioned, but
it had Bon Jovi in it.
Well, but there's something about these movies sort of set on a submarine where it's in this enclosed space, and you know you're surrounded by water, and it's just inherently tense. And it's funny you made the connection to Das Boot here, because for most of the episode we're not on the U-boat, right? They're above the water, but it has this sort of tension and this feeling of impending doom that you get in those U-boat and submarine movies.
Yeah. Another a bad movie that it reminded me of was Ghost Ship with Juliana Margulies. Did you see
I don't
this?
think I have seen Ghost Ship.
It's not worth seeing. Do not watch it. But there's a brief shot in the film when he's trying to go around warning everyone, and there's kind of these accusatory ghosts, I guess for lack of a better word, that are kind of staring at him. Mm-hmm. That vanish, and Ghost Ship was so there's a very, I will say the beginning of Ghost Ship was, if you're into like those like hostile like torture porn movies, there's a very gross opening of Ghost Ship, how all these people, like a cable comes through and like cuts a bunch of people in half. It's not worth watching. It's gory, it's graphic, but it literally is a ghost ship that goes around and there's ghosts on it, and I think they kill people. I don't really remember a whole lot about it, but for whatever reason this reminded me of Ghost Ship because of those shots of ghosts. So
there's a great X-Files episode, and I can't think of which season it's from, but where there is this sort of abandoned ship that they're exploring, and Mulder and Scully are both exploring it, but they're like in different times or like alternate realities, so they can kind of like pass each other. They can't see each other, and you kind of see as the episode, you know, cuts from kind of one of them to the other, like different things happening when they're on the same space in the boat. It was one of those that was kind of playing with time multiverse sort of things. That had the similar sort of feel, like ticking clockish, like something's gonna, and I don't remember the details of it. Something's they have to figure out something or find their way to each other or whatever. But that same sort of just tension through the whole episode, you know something's coming. That being on this, something about just like being in an enclosed space, whether that's the submarine or you're on a boat, or there've been plenty of movies where people are in some isolated, Arctic research station or something, but something where like there's no way out. You're sort of stuck in this space, and whatever's going to happen is going to happen. Alien. And that's just not that every movie that does that sort of thing is great, but it's one of those that's like, that's a premise that can get you pretty far in terms of creating the conditions to have a good movie.
Yeah. And so I guess I kind of wrote these down as sort of a shit sandwich because I went good, bad, and I'll go good again. One that I've actually never seen, but I desperately, because I don't know where to find it, but I do want to see.
I feel like every one of these episodes we're like, here's a really good movie that I haven't seen.
Well, here's my latest one then. Hitchcock directed one called Lifeboat.
Yeah.
And so, have you seen this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well then you describe it, because from the description of it, the first half of this episode reminds me of the description of Lifeboat.
What's the description?
Well, my description is basically like a World War II, a U-boat and a Allied boat sink each other. There's some survivors on this lifeboat. They pull a German out of the water who's trying to convince him he's basically not the guy who just sunk their ship. And so like the paranoia, I think the first half of they didn't lean into this paranoia at all, probably because they didn't have the time for it. Mm-hmm. But to me, it felt like what The Thing is. just that the John
John
Carpenter
Carpenter.
movie, the thing, just that not being able to know, hey, who can we trust? It seemed, if I can find if anyone can send me a copy of The Lifeboat, I would love to watch it, because I've that's sort of my white whale, because I don't think that one's a super easy movie to find without paying for it.
I was gonna say I am 100% sure it's findable. Findable for free is always,
and I don't mean for free. I just mean, I don't want to buy it. I'd like to be able to rent it somewhere.
One of the things I found that's just so striking to me, and this is totally generational. So there's the generation ahead of me in sort of academic film studies. Basically, when they were coming up, a lot of things were just inaccessible, right? If there was some classic movie, the only way you were going to get a chance to see it was, it was showing at a art house or museum or something, was doing, got the print out or rented the print and showed it, and you would have one night you could go see it if you happened to live in this big city. And otherwise, you just didn't get a chance to see things because you could only watch them when they were in film. And then I came through in the generation where we had this sort of glut of accessibility, which was great. Like all these classic films had come back out on, first VHS and then definitely DVD. I think DVD was sort of like the big thing where all these things started to be super accessible, and, studios went back through their old collections and brought stuff out that hadn't been available for a long time. And so really, most movies, if we wanted to see them, there was a way to get your hands on them, with some exceptions. But for the most part, if you're like, oh, I want to study this old Hitchcock film, well, you go get the DVD of the old Hitchcock film and you can watch it till your heart's content and stop and look at individual shots and such. And there's some famous early film study stuff that's just flat out wrong, but it's interesting because it's very much of its time, where they got to go see the movie in the theater once and are like frantically taking notes and could never go back and look at something, so they're writing based on the notes they took and got some details wrong because they didn't have the chance to correct themselves, and nobody could look at the film to see if they were right or wrong for another 20 years. Anyway, so then
that is modern.
Well, so then the current generation, what I find fascinating is, even though we have more accessibility than there has ever been, there's still all the stuff that came out on DVD is still available, either to buy on DVD or through Amazon or through libraries or whatever. Plus you have all this stuff streaming that, like, you don't even need to go pick up a disc. Like, you can log into Netflix and Amazon and Hulu and the 30 other services that are out there and find all this stuff. What I find fascinating is, what I see in this next generation is stuff has become so accessible that their bar for accessibility has been raised. So now for them, something's accessible if it's available streaming for free right now, and if it's not accessible. This really, I've talked to some of my film students about this, and I don't know how much of this is specific to college students or the particular college students at my school or what. Or maybe it's universal, I don't know, but I've talked to them about it. But in my residence hall, we were doing, before Endgame came out, we were screening like all the Marvel movies that month so like people could catch up. And a couple people mentioned, like, they'd come to a specific movie, like, yeah, it was really great to have the chance to, see whatever it is, Doctor Strange or something, because I had missed that one when it came out, and now I have a chance to see it because it wasn't available otherwise. I'm like, it's literally like there are 10 services you could rent it on and stream it right now. It's on DVD, it's on Blu-ray, our library has it. Like, it's super accessible, but it wasn't on Netflix,
right?
And that was what they had, and so it's not accessible. Yeah. And I find that fascinating, that it's now like, I'm not willing to do any work to find something. Like, it has to show up right when I click in the first place I search, and if I can't, it's not accessible.
For sure. Not to hurry you along, Mark, but we're starting to run.
We're starting to run long. Okay,
but I'm going to hurry you along. So one of the things
another reference you want to bring up.
Yeah, not even a reference, but so one of the modern applicability themes that I think we saw, and again, that they didn't necessarily explore this, but I think, living in the United States in the current era, we have a lot of concerns about foreign powers infiltrating and interfering with our U.S. affairs. So I thought that this was
Sometimes
to be
with
watching
encouragement from our U.S. officials.
Yeah. To be watching this in 2020, I thought was decently well timed. And then also, I know this is not a politics podcast, but at the very end,
bring it up every time.
But we do bring it up every time. But like, I don't know. I think that's what is more modern than what's going on in politics right now. So at the end, though, there was a lot of talk during Obama's administration about drone strikes and the implications of ordering an attack on this ship containing women and children without giving them a warning. I remember the American president, that one with Michael Douglas, I think was his name, or president, right? And Annette Bening. He's trying to figure out what they had a military target. And he's basically trying to figure out when they can hit it when there's the fewest number of people in the base. He's like, how many people are on the night crew? And they're like, well, 3. And he's like, well, did they take break? Like, he was basically trying to mitigate as much possible human life lost and damage as he could possibly do while still hitting this military target, which I don't really have faith in our current administration to care about that. And I thought that it was neat that not only were they wrapping up the episode, but that this guy was expressing that, hey, we needed to destroy these supplies and put them at the bottom of the ocean, but we didn't need to kill, these women and children and innocent and civilians.
Well, and that was, I'm glad you brought that up, because I noted the same thing when it's foreshadowed earlier in the episode. Mr. Potter, I think it is, again, talks about the submarines like skulking, and he's like, I'd rather fight a ship because at least you can see it. It's not this hidden thing underneath you. And that reminded me too of sort of the way warfare is carried on now, where it's done from a distance, whether it's a drone strike, from 50,000 feet up without even a pilot and somebody's controlling it, or there's a pilot but not a pilot in it, whoever's controlling it is like in a different country, thousands of miles away. Or it's, subs, and we have, thankfully that, knock on wood, this hasn't happened yet, but, we have these nuclear missiles that can be launched from a sub, and basically fly up into space, go all the way around to the other side of the world and come down. There's this sort of action at a distance where you never do see what you're fighting anymore. And obviously, I don't mean never, there's still ground combat and such that happens, but it's such a different model, and this felt very sort of old school to me. The guy, I want the thing there I can see, and submarines are kind of like unfair because it's hidden down there and you can't see it until it's right on top of you.
Yeah. So as far as Twilight Zone themes go, the kind of recurring things that we've seen, I do feel like once again we sort of explored time, because this guy is caught in this boop cycle of just repeating the same day over and over again, and it's just that he's for eternity. And then heaven and hell, like there's a lot of religious allegory in the episodes that we've seen so far, and this was just another one that he was literally in hell.
When I made that prediction early on about this one, that it was going to be like he was in hell, I'm like, man, I hope this isn't just me going, because there were like several episodes in a row where I kept just predicting it was something about heaven or hell. I'm like, I'm not getting stuck in that again. There's also the loneliness aspect that has shown up in a lot of these episodes when 115 hits and suddenly everybody's gone and he's kind of like running through the ship by himself. A little bit flashback to Where Is Everybody, our first episode. Yeah. One of the things, just in terms of the Twilight Zone themes, and this one very relevant in terms of recent episodes, because we just saw Perchance to Dream as our last one, where the guy gets killed in his nightmare. And they definitely, so this does not turn out that he was in a dream, but there was definitely that idea of playing with a dream a lot. It reminded me of Inception again, particularly in the conversation between Lancer and Ms. Stanley, where he's talking about, I just sort of woke up here. I don't know how long I've been here. And I was thinking of the scene in Inception where they say you never remember how a dream starts. And I thought that like having 2 episodes in a row with sort of these dream elements was interesting. And I don't know if that happened to be where Serling's head was at that moment, or just that just was sort of happenstance, or sometimes you might have a bunch of episodes written and they end up just getting filmed or released in a particular order based on scheduling and which actors were available and such. But it was interesting those 2 ended up back to back to me. I do have to mention from that same conversation where they're specifically talking about he feels like he knew her and had seen her before, and they never said the words deja vu, but they were, talking about this whole idea of like, walking in a room and you feel like you've been there and had that conversation. And I was like, oh, that's cute. We have to mention the word deja vu on our Deja Reviewed podcast because that's just too good an opportunity to miss.
Very good. One of the things that you mentioned when we were going through the episode that sparked something in my mind about the modern applicability. So there is always a argument, especially in this country, about whether prison and punishment is it supposed to be rehabilitory or supposed to be retributionary, however you say those two words. So, and you mentioned that he does kind of, because the way that the main character played the U-boat, himself as the U-boat captain, and then the victim, like he obviously, and he's trying to save all these other, well, he's probably also trying to save himself, but like maybe this punishment was a rehabilitory, punishment for him, because he cared about himself. He was trying to, and frankly, he could have just jumped off that boat and tried to save himself, but he did try to save everyone on the boat. I mean, granted, jumping in the ocean in the middle of the night is probably killing yourself anyhow, but that's another, I think, a modern theme of how we handle criminals, and whether we're supposed to be rehabilitating criminals or just punishing them for past misdeeds. I think that you could probably write a long paper on that.
Well, and the larger sort of philosophical question there, about like, what does it mean that the same guy who could be the U-boat captain who says like, well, we're going to sink them, women and children, whatever, and kind of makes fun of his subordinate for bringing this stuff up. He's like, first he calls him a fool, and then the guy says, what if God damned us? Like, you're not only a fool, you're also a religious fool.
Yeah.
I guess once you're stuck in hell, you have a higher probability of believing that there is some supernatural afterlife as you're in it. But the same person who could have that attitude would be the person who goes down and, tries to find people and rescue them. And he's like, do I have to like knock you out and carry you off the ship? Like, he's making a real point to do it. Raises this really interesting question, that, artists and storytellers and then also psychologists have been wrestling with forever about how much is sort of like what's inherent to you, what is your person versus the context that you're put in. The sort of, I guess, like most consequential example would be like in things like war, where there's the question of like, well, you're just following orders and I'm put in this role and this is what I have to do, even if you in everyday life would be the nicest person. And it made us sort of reconcile that we were introduced to this guy's, struggling first off because he can't remember anything about where he is or what he's doing, but then trying to be like, do the right thing. And then we find out like, well, he's also this, person who blew up the ship with women and children and murdered all these people. It reminded me of, some of those studies, where they'll do the thing like where people in a psychology study we like randomly assign to like, you're the prisoner or you're the guard, and they just randomly put people in these roles, and almost immediately like the people who are guards become really sadistic and are like torturing the prisoners, because they're put in this context to do it. And it makes you think about how much is inherently you and how much is the context you happen to be in at that moment. I don't know. So I thought that was really a really big question that we're all sort of struggling with, and is really important to society. Is how much are you responsible for your actions? How much is it your environment, your upbringing, the job you're in, and all these other things?
Yeah.
I want to draw one other thing to make a movie reference as we do, and also kind of modern applicability. But one of the ways, I know you like to ask the question, like, would this episode hold up in today, 2020? And this idea of the U-boat sort of following them beneath, and there's this fog and we can't see anything. So I'm getting at sort of before we deal with the fact that he's actually in hell, but just sort of the suspense of most of the episode, because it's about two thirds of it is just they're on this boat and like could be a conventional sort of spy thriller or war movie, until we sort of get to those last few sequences where he sees himself again. I think this does hold up, and because whether it's 1959 or 1942 or today, there is a sort of universal truth that fear of the unknown is kind of worse than the known, right? This is why Mr. Potter doesn't like the submarines skulking around down there where we can't see him. He wants a battleship he can fight. And, this is why people fear the deep sea, the dark, sharks under the water. You can't see them until they're attacking you. I thought of Jaws, which is a great movie. And there's the legend that there may not actually be totally true because there's other things going on with it, but that, Spielberg didn't want to show the shark until close to the end, because whatever you imagine is scarier than what you see. It's the classic horror movie thing where, like, if you don't show the monster, whatever the audience imagines is going to be worse.
Or the shark just didn't work.
Or the shark didn't work, which is Spielberg, there's sort of been this myth built up, like, I want to save the shark for the third act, and then you, like, look at all the production, like, well, they were trying to show the shark earlier and they couldn't get it to work, so happy accident that they've sort of retroactively put a meaning on.
Yeah, because that movie's just about perfect for a horror movie.
Yeah, but I thought so that theme is still relevant, and I think was part of the reason, as you said, this episode's so creepy, because even though we're not in 1942 on a ship, being chased by U-boats, like, we all have that fear of, like, the thing you can't see, the sort of dread, like, I know something's
the monster
coming and I can't see it. And I thought the fog was a great, to give some credit to the writing and the direction and production design here, a great visual illustration of this. Like, they're surrounded 360 degrees by what they can't see, and then under them is the water where you can't see what's under there. Like, they literally can't see anything outside their boat in any direction. What a scary proposition.
Yeah. Okay, should we rate this bad boy?
Let's rate it, yeah.
Okay. Like I said, I thought that this was a very creepy episode. We've been getting into the creepy ones. I thought this episode was cool as hell. I, right off, no pun intended, but right off the boat, want to give it a 5.
I'm pretty close with you. I was debating between like a 4.5 and a 5. There were some little nitpicky stuff we came up with, but I was engaged the whole way through. It's a creative premise and gave us a lot of big themes that I think sort of resonated afterwards to think about and talk about. So I'll go ahead and bump it and say 5.
Okay, perfect.
Was this our first episode that we've both given a 5 to?
For sure. Yeah. And I had to talk you into it, but that's okay. I think the other one.
If you hadn't talked me into it, it would have been a 4.5. I mean, it was very.
I actually started with a 4.5, but the more I thought about it, the more I liked it. But I think a 5 is fair, because this is one of those episodes, and I think that's kind of our a little bit of our standard. This is one of those episodes that I would show to someone to say, this is why you should watch The Twilight Zone.
Yeah, and even the nitpicky stuff we had about it, some of the things, talking about like the U-boat strategy, I was like, I don't know if this belongs in this episode, but it was really interesting anyway, and I liked it.
Yeah.
So, cool.
Well,
I'm glad we saw that after our last episode. We felt like we didn't have much to say about it and was not one of our better ones.
True. Well, thank you all for listening. This was Deja Reviewed. Oh, no, I'm sorry, Mark. We have to have you guess.
This was not Deja Reviewed?
This is Deja Reviewed, but you have to guess what next week's episode is about. You ready?
Okay, I guess this one totally wrong, so...
That's okay.
It was not, in fact, a pre-make of the movie Judgment Night.
Let's say in 30 seconds or less, what do you think of when you hear "and when the sky was opened"?
I think religious imagery and sort of Book of Revelation, the sky opened. So I'm gonna say some kind of post-apocalyptic thing. Since we just had a hell episode, I'm gonna guess it's not another religious one right after that. So I'm gonna say it's sort of a post-apocalyptic, like immediate aftermath of a nuclear war and like a lone survivor.
Nice. We'll find out next week or next time, probably next week.
Hopefully next week.
Thank you all for listening. As always, this was Deja Reviewed. Next week's episode, like we said, is episode 11 of season 1 of The Twilight Zone, titled "And When the Sky Was Opened." We'll have a link to that in the show notes. Feel free to leave us a rating and a comment wherever you're listening to us, or you can just leave us a voicemail on the anchor.fm website, or you can find us at dejareviewed.com. We hope you tune in next time. Deja Reviewed.